Hey guys, welcome to my channel. This is my first official video, so thank you so much for testing the waters with me. My name is AJ, and I am an urban legend, true crime, and internet myth aficionado. One of the best grades I got in school was for my urban legend project that proved to be way more realistic than my teacher was actually anticipating. There were calls to my parents and some questions of if I needed counseling or not. So, without any further ado, and childhood trauma aside, let's talk a little bit about this legend of Bunnyman Bridge. It'll be presented in 3 parts: a brief overview, the urban legend of fame, and finally, the true facts. There's a bridge in Clifton, Virginia, that is haunted by a specter, specifically on Halloween night. Now, he makes his presence known throughout the rest of the year, but he is an annual visitor on October 31st every year since the early 1900s. He's bound to a particular railroad bridge called the Kolchester Overpass. It has a 1-lane tunnel running under it, and it's actually a residential area at this time. The tracks also still see occasional use. The most popular tales involve seeing a ghostly train run over a ghostly figure. Many others talk about mutilated rabbit corpses that pop up in the surrounding area from time to time. More stories include a couple being attacked in their car by a white-robed man while wielding a hatchet. Personally, I've been to this bridge on several occasions. I've had some of my own experiences that I will absolutely share later in this video. Our story starts in 1904 in Clifton, Virginia. More specifically, Kolchester, Virginia, but at this point it's been absorbed by Clifton. In 1904, there weren't any clowns running amok. Oh, no. They were escaped mental asylum patients. As the story goes, a man named Douglas J. Griffin killed his wife and children on Easter Sunday in typical family annihilator meets axe murderer fashion. I joke lightly about this now, but you'll see why I do later in this video. There's not much else information on here, other than he was sent to an institute for the criminally insane somewhere in Clifton, Virginia. A short time after he was sent there, however, the asylum was closed due to a petition signed by the residents of Clifton, so long-term or life patients were being moved to a new location. I make the assumption, though, that they were being transferred to Lorton Penitentiary, which at this time is actually closed and has been completely renovated into an incredible art gallery. Anyway, back to Douglas Griffin. There's nothing on him to say that he wasn't a model inmate or even that he showed further signs of insanity, but that all changed during this transport to the new location. Inmates were loaded onto buses, roughly 49 at a time, with 1 guard and 1 bus driver. A variety of inmates were on each bus, so as to lessen the strain of having to transport several violent offenders at one time. Now, Griffin's crime placed him in the equivalent of a death row inmate, so he actually sat at the back next to one of the guards. Well, the one guard. Something then caused the bus to crash. Now, whether it was due to distractions, a mechanical failure, maybe just the driver going too fast in the early morning on these backwood roads, there's really no clear answer as to why it crashed, but it ended up killing 10 people, including the driver. The guard was apparently injured, but he did help some inmates escape the vehicle, and he then began to round up a lot of the more compliant but really insane individuals. While doing this, with no backup or help, or even a prayer that someone else was close enough to help him, he basically could not keep Griffin and some of the other more violent inmates contained. Griffin spared him, but took off into the woods after threatening him. Eventually, all inmates except for Griffin were caught. Now, within the weeks that followed, there was absolute chaos. This was where the first sightings of mutilated rabbit corpses began to crop up. They were found strung to trees underneath the Kolchester Overpass, discarded and half-eaten on roadsides. Soon, other reports from residents in the area began to come into police about a dirty, white-clad figure skulking on the edge of properties and killing small animals. some people were legitimately concerned, and they had every right to be, that police hadn't actually recaptured all the fugitives, and they would have been correct. Over the next few months until October, the reports escalated in number of sightings and intensity. Finally, October 31st, Halloween Day, at some point between 9:15 and 1915 and 1920. The years are not really exact here. Again, I'll explain why later. Police actually made a move to capture Douglas J. Griffin and remand him back into custody. It took all day to locate and then really herd him back to the Kolchester overpass, where the whole police force was waiting to capture him. They were ultimately unsuccessful in this attempt because a train was coming, and Griffin, in an attempt to either evade capture or possibly, as some people believe, to just commit suicide, he actually leapt into the path of the oncoming train. Some argue that he was trying to jump over the side of the overpass and hopefully run to safety that way. But with the way that the one-lane road is set up, it would have been really easy. And in fact, they probably had police officers on the other side. So that doesn't really make sense. A lot of people say, oh, it was probably suicide. The other option is, honestly, he may have just not known how to hobo hop onto a train, and he just tried to do it right at the front. Either way, his remains had to be picked up over the next quarter-mile of track. Every year after this, on Halloween, he graces Clifton with his gruesome death replayed, and with the ghostly sound of a train whistle echoing through the hills. Wow, okay. Don't get me wrong, it's a fun story. But what are the facts to this? Honestly, really, there's none. Independent research suggests that there was a fugitive at one point who did commit suicide by train at or near this location. However, there is no history at all of an asylum anywhere near Clifton, unless it may have been a private in-home asylum. However, again, no historical records of this can be found, and certainly there are none for the criminally insane. Now, the prison that I mentioned earlier, the one located in Lorton, Virginia, is the only place that criminals with any sort of mental instability were housed during this time, and even then it was nothing extreme. In fact, it's completely plausible that basically this entire story was fabricated in the 1990s by a man named Timothy C. Forbes, and then was posted on a 90s version of Blogspot. Okay, well, you're gonna ask me, there's some truth to this, right? Yeah, absolutely. There was a man who died on the tracks. There were mutilated corpses of small animals found half-eaten in Clifton throughout 1910 all the way to 1940s. Now, the theory on that is that it was just a harmless man who was living off the land. But then, finally, there is the kicker. On October 19th of 1970, a couple was in their car coming home from a football game. They were U.S. Air Force Academy cadet Robert Bennett and his fiancée, whose name I cannot find. I really apologize. Basically, they were reliable witnesses. Now, Cadet Bennett was visiting family, and he and his fiancée parked their car off of the property line somewhere down the road. Nobody's really sure why. He said that they stopped to talk before they went into family, things like that. All of a sudden, as they were talking together, they saw movement behind them. And all of a sudden, their front passenger window was smashed open, and a man reportedly wearing a long white robe and huge white bunny ears stood right next to their car. He told them, "You are on private property and I have your tags." Apparently when he said it, he was completely calm, like he hadn't just smashed their window while wearing bunny ears. That alone, yeah, creepy enough. I would have floored it. But as they took off down the road to Cadet Bennett's uncle's home, his fiancée noticed that a hatchet was actually on the floor between her feet. She wasn't hurt by it. She and the cadet both expressed confusion to police as to how they didn't even notice that such a large weapon had entered the car. They said that they didn't even see the man wielding it. After this, the police took the hatchet for testing, and Cadet Bennett filed an official report with the Air Force. Now, only 10 days later, on October 29th, there was another incident. Now, this one to me, it's not as violent, but it's actually creepier. Construction security guard Paul Phillips approached a man standing on the porch of an unfinished home on Guinea Road, not that far from Kolchester Road. The man was simply staring at him as he approached, and as he began to get closer to the steps, this individual began chopping the porch railing to splinters, while telling Phillips, quote, "You are trespassing. If you come any closer, I'll chop off your head." No, thank you. I don't want to be here for that. Side note. So, my husband, he's requested to go by Ace in any of these videos, should I ever mention him, and here it is, first video, I'm mentioning him. Anyway, he is a licensed trained security officer. He says that this is an experience that initially, when he started out in security, he would have loved to have come across. It's one of those weird stories, everybody has one. But as he's become a more seasoned officer, he would actually consider this to be one of the more truly dangerous situations that he could have been in. And he's been in some situations where I didn't know if he was going to come home or not. So I definitely trust his judgment on this one. Anyway, Phillips immediately left and called police backup, giving the description of the man as a young 20-something man, 5 feet, 8 inches tall, wearing a gray and white bunny costume. Full costume, by the way. Full costume. And wielding a long-handled axe. Police were not able to find the suspect, but it is the second and last confirmed sighting of the bunny man in the costume. But after this, reports just would not stop coming in about the bunny man. He was spotted all over the area, going all the way into mid-November. At the end of it, 54 different reports from concerned and terrified citizens had poured in. It was really sensationalized by the Washington Post as well, which I grew up with the Washington Post. It's one of the most respected publications. Even if they have a little bit of a bias, they're still honestly right up there with like the New York Times. They are really the ones that took this and really made sure that it was front page news. Now, there is one headline in here that cracks me up. So the 4 major stories that they wrote were Man in Bunny Costume Sought in Fairfax. That was published October 22nd of 1970. The Rabbit reappears on Halloween, October 31st of 1970. Bunny Man seen on November 4th of 1970. And finally, my favorite one, Bunny reports are multiplying on November 6th of 1970. Okay, so if this is the real story, then why is it still retold? Even to the point that in 2011 on Halloween night, over 200 cars, some even from neighboring states, were turned away by a police roadblock that was keeping surveillance on this otherwise remote area of Northern Virginia. Because people keep it alive. Like I've said, I myself have visited this site many times. I've even had the privilege of visiting it on Halloween 3 separate times. I've heard the ghostly train whistles, though, to be fair, it could be another train in the distance. I've seen the specter. I've seen the figure of a man going up the steep embankment and onto the tracks, and as soon as he gets to the middle, he vanishes. Maybe that's just fog. I've never seen fog move that way, but it could have been. Now, the most disturbing of all, however, is that in this 2011 time period, there were many mutilated corpses of rabbits that were being hung from the tracks. They were being hung on, on road signs, on tree branches, pretty much everywhere. They were being ripped apart, tossed onto roads. I remember that year driving on one of the major roads that goes near Kolchester, which was actually a road that I literally drove on every day of my life, you would sometimes in that area around Halloween of 2011 see rabbits like just torn to shreds, and it wouldn't look like roadkill, it would look like something a lot more violent had happened to them. In fact, I will say that another side story to this is that out of the 200 cars, one of them actually had one of my classmates in it. Now, he told my class of 9 people in it that it was his cousin and his cousin's friends hanging up all of these rabbit corpses. It wasn't, but fame at any cost in high school, even having perceived knowledge of an ongoing police investigation, which is, reading it here, that's illegal, so, high school was a strange time for us all. Anyway, this was pretty much all chalked up to pranks and mischief, though I would tend to think that the bunnies would disagree. After Halloween, however, the reports slowed down, but every once in a while, more reports would roll in. Now, why do I love it so much? I'm sure you're asking that. Well, it was my very first urban legend encounter, and it's the one that I have my own stories to contribute to. I'd say I've gone there a total of 16 times, and about 50% of the trips that I've made have had either some paranormal or at least kind of creepy event happen. Bunnyman Bridge is a great example, though, of how urban legends can really take off, become basically fact or history for an area, even with no proof, and then have some sort of truth breathed into them. Maybe it's just mob mentality or a less immediate explosive scale. Possibly so much has been said about this area that the land itself just kind of gave in and created a ghost for us. Either way, to me, it's a really intriguing story, and I'm proud that it was my local urban legend growing up. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts, stories, and maybe even personal experiences with Bunnyman Bridge. Comment below if you've been there, or if you've never heard of it before but now may want to check it out. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and to subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for joining me down this rabbit hole of my childhood, and please come back for another video. So, I do have a final segment. I don't know if I'll do this in future videos, but I did kind of want to share it for this one. There are a few pop culture references to Bunnyman Bridge, and they're actually pretty good, I think, anyway. Now, Bunnyman, the final song on the album Music to Piss You Off, which is a 2010 compilation album by rhythmic noise and industrial artist CAT, Chaos and Terror, and it was directly inspired by the Bunnyman legend. In 2011, slasher film Bunnyman is an exploitation-style version of this story, and I think you can actually find it for free online at this point. Now, this is my favorite, and I am actually kind of sad that I no longer live in the area, but in 2017, Bad Wolf Brewing Company, who I actually have heard of, and they do make some pretty good beers, local beers usually. Anyway, they are based in Manassas, Virginia. They released a hoppy red lager known as the Bunnyman in a can that depicted the tunnel, a figure in a bunny suit, and a child holding a red balloon with a nice tip of the hat to it right there. Finally, there was a 2017 Amazon original series called Lore, and it was actually based on the podcast of the same name, which uses the Bunnyman legend to introduce the second episode of Season 1. Again, thank you so much for watching, guys. I'm AJ. Join me next week for another urban legend.